¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes amigos de DBB Noticias, los hago como todos los días desde la ciudad de Londres, Pascual Raúl Zárate Gil. Antes de comenzar los queremos invitar como todos los días que entren a nuestro portal de noticias dbbnoticias.com, un portal que tiene el propósito único de mantenerlos bien informados de los distintos acontecimientos locales, federales e internacionales que les van dando la vuelta al mundo. Y bueno, como todos vieron, estamos a nuestro invitado de lujo, el doctor Werner Boyd. Y bueno, antes de entrar con su comentario de la semana, le queremos agradecer como cada semana que nos tome la llamada, así como también dar un poco un pues antecedente de su carrera jurídica. Y no solamente es un piloto, pero bueno, sobre el área en específico, el doctor es un abogado calificado por la barra de Estados Unidos. Además cuenta con años de experiencia en los mejores despachos del mundo, también ubicado en Estados Unidos, así como también cuenta con un doctorado por la Universidad de Cairo en Derecho Islámico, y finalmente su trayectoria en la academia en la Universidad de la UPAEP, y también impartiendo la cátedra en la Universidad de Bremen. Y bueno, también hay que reconocer, pues prácticamente es un analista completo de política, de distintos acontecimientos comerciales, también legales. Y bueno, como siempre, es que vamos a agradecer los que nos estén siguiendo. Y vamos a cambiar al día de hoy a inglés. Because today we have Dr. Werner Boyd. As every Friday, we would like to appreciate and say thank you so much for taking this phone call. And as we have been reading for the last few days, and also we have shared with you during the last few weeks as well, together with Dr. Werner Boyd, Mexico has been involved on a very different number of discussions, negotiations related to tariffs. Of course, it's not only Mexico, mainly because the main ruler of this latest news is always Donald Trump. However, this week there has been a new development, and therefore Dr. Werner Boyd will talk about a topic title on November. Donald Trump will impose an illegal punity tariff of 25% on all imports of medium and heavy trucks. That has been potential of killing Mexico's truck export to the United States, worth $22 billion annually. Dr. Verneboy, good afternoon.
A very good afternoon. Well, as you just said, in a significant and surprising escalation this week of his protectionist trade agenda, Donald Trump has announced that all medium and heavy duty trucks imported into the United States will be hit with a crushing 25% tariff starting November 1. The move, which the president says is necessary to protect American companies from unfair outside competition, opens a new and volatile front in his global trade war and is set to directly impact some of America's closest allies, Mexico and Canada. The announcement, which Trump made on his social media platform Truth Social, was a stark and sudden declaration. He said, beginning November 1st, 2025, all medium and heavy duty trucks coming into the United States from other countries will be tariffed at the rate of 25%. Well, the top sources of imported trucks to the United States are by far Mexico, and then Canada, Japan, Germany, Finland, and Sweden. The president has argued the new duties are necessary to restore fairness and will directly benefit American manufacturing giants like the PACCAR that owns Peterbilt and Kenworth divisions, as well as Daimler trucks called Freightliner. Well, the new tariffs or the new tariff is particularly disruptive for our highly integrated North American automobile industry. Mexico, the single largest exporter of trucks to the United States, has seen its shipments triple since 2019. to around 340,000 units per year. Under the North American trade deal, the USMCA, called the TEMEC in Mexico, these trucks have moved tariff-free as long as they meet certain regional content requirements. Well, all of that will end on the 1st of November. The new 25% levy threatens to upend the arrangement known as the USMCA, directly impacting major automakers who have built their supply chains around this trade zone. The Chrysler parent company, Stellantis, which produces its heavy-duty trucks, the Ram trucks, and commercial vans in Mexico, has been lobbying hard in the White House to avoid the steep tariffs, but so far without success. Meanwhile, Sweden's Volvo Group is in the process of building a massive $700 million heavy-duty truck factory in Monterrey, Mexico, a major investment that is now directly in danger. While India, which has been the largest of Trump's tariff wrath targets in other sectors, India will be spared this time as it does not export trucks to the United States. The new move is a powerful and unsettling signal for India as well, however. The trade war, as it seems, is far, far from over, and it is finding new fronts to fight on. Mexico is urging the United States now to reconsider new import duties on heavy vehicles that could affect cross-border trade, President Claudia Sheinbaum said last week. Her remarks followed Donald Trump's announcement last week of that 25% tariff on heavy trucks and medium trucks. And also he announced a 100% tariff on branded pharmaceuticals, both scheduled to take effect on the 1st of November. Well, we are already in talks, hoping there will be consideration for Mexico, President Sheinbaum said during her daily press conference. If not, it would create problems even in the United States. She emphasized the high integration of the two economies, particularly in the automotive sector. The commercial relationship with the United States remains very, very important, and Mexico has a very large competitive advantage, stated President Sheinbaum, highlighting the cross-border supply chains for trucks and truck components. Most other Mexican exports to the United States continue to benefit from zero tariffs under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the USMCA, except for finished vehicles and steel exports in other sectors have increased in recent weeks, thanks to the zero tariff provisions of the agreement, President Sheinbaum said. Mexican officials are now in communication with U.S. counterparts to clarify the impact of this new tariff and provide data on how the heavy vehicle supply chain supports U.S. manufacturers and distributors as well. The goal is to avoid disruptions in a sector that is vital for both countries, the U.S. and Mexico. Large truck manufacturers, including Peterbilt, Kenworth, Freightliner, and Mack Trucks, are expected to be shielded from immediate market disruptions, according to Trump. However, Mexico remains the largest exporter of medium and heavy-duty trucks to the United States, followed by Canada, Japan, and Germany, says the Commerce Department's International Trade Administration in Washington. U.S. domestic heavy truck manufacturers may see limited benefit if materials for production continue to face high duties. The overall impact depends on whether tariff offsets, similar to those on light-duty trucks, are implemented. The German automotive industry and its association called the United States measure incomprehensible, warning that the tariffs could raise costs, weaken supply chains, and affect investment and employment. This concern is amplified by Mexico's role in North America's heavy truck market, hosting 14 bus, truck, and tractor manufacturers and assemblers, as well as 2 engine producers, and producing 95% of the trucks entering the United States. 95% is being produced here in Mexico. Well, Trump's announcement was linked to an investigation by the Department of Commerce under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of the United States, which authorizes tariffs if imports are deemed a threat to national security. Now, why does Trump justify the tariffs with national security arguments? That's the question. Trump defended the measure by stating it is necessary to protect the U.S. domestic industry. Thus, he said, thus our great truck manufacturers like Peterbilt, Kenworth, Freightliner, Mack Trucks, and others will be protected. He also claimed it was a matter of national security purposes in line with Article 232 and denounced predatory trade practices by foreign suppliers dominating the U.S. truck market. How do these tariffs now affect Mexico? The measure has direct implications for us here in Mexico, which from January to July of 2025 exported $25.5 billion in trucks, buses, and special vehicles to the United States. 25,500,000,000. That is the number. This figure represents a 13.8% year-over-year decline, although Mexico clearly remains the sector's leader in the United States. Additionally, Stellantis, that was formerly known as Chrysler Corporation, reported that 22% of its trucks registered in the United States come from Mexico and to a lesser degree from Canada. And Stellantis emphasized that these vehicles comply with the U.S.-Mexico Commercial Agreement, the trilateral agreement that sets strict standards on regional content, on labor conditions, and materials like steel and aluminum. Which companies and models now are at risk due to these tariffs that will go into effect in 3 weeks? Although many manufacturers have production facilities in the United States, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis assemble the larger part of their medium trucks and heavy trucks in Mexico. In contrast, companies like PACCAR, which makes Peterbilt and Kenworth, as well as Volvo, that makes Mack trucks, produce nearly all their U.S. trucks domestically. International Motors, formerly known as Navistar, relies on 98% of its vehicles imported from Mexico, followed by Daimler, which approximately imports 83% of the trucks it sells in the U.S. market from Mexico. This makes these companies, International Motors as well as Daimler, very vulnerable to the new tariff idea that Donald Trump is threatening. Well, how many medium and heavy trucks are imported into the United States? According to the Department of Commerce, in 2025, about 245,000 medium and heavy trucks were imported, with a value exceeding $25 billion. The total flow of imports in this category, including buses and special vehicles, reached $32.41 billion. What does the USMCA play in this tariff dispute? The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the USMCA, establishes clear conditions for automotive trade, including regional content requirements. We're talking about 75% of components for these trucks must be sourced from within the region of North America. Now, Stellantis has stressed that Mexican vehicles comply with all of these rules under the USMCA and therefore should not be penalized. It is highly likely that these Canadian and Mexican vehicles meet the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. However, Trump appears to be using Section 232 as an alternative mechanism to the USMCA, trying to bypass the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement in order to impose discretionary tariffs under the guise of national security. It is purely a pretext. So let's then talk about Mexico in a little more detail. Mexico's Ministry of Economy contends that tariffs on its sales of heavy trucks and truck parts run definitely counter to U.S. national security interests and fail to support U.S. commitments to the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement of July 2020. Mexico noted that the USMCA partner nations have committed to strict rules of origin to solidify North American regional supply chains. This resulted in a higher requirement of regional value content of first 64% since July of 2024, and then it will go into effect with 70% in the year 2027. And new requirements of labor value content, we're talking here about 45%, and purchases of steel and aluminum, 70%, Mexican truck exports to the United States have achieved each and every one of these requirements under the USMCA agreement since its implementation. Mexico further stated that tariffs would undermine the bilateral supply chain between Mexican truck makers and U.S. suppliers and U.S. assembly plants. Mexico also pointed out that all Mexican-made trucks sold to the United States have on average 50% American components. Those are components coming from American factories in U.S. territory. That includes diesel engines, which can account for 35% of a truck's component content. Now, Mexico bought from the United States $72.2 billion in parts last year, and all of that for truck production, representing 31% of total U.S. global exports of these goods last year. Mexico is the top buyer of American truck parts and related products made in Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona, California, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, New Mexico, Oregon, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and Wisconsin. So Trump's tariff now would be catastrophic for all of these states in the United States that I just listed. The United States and Mexico should build on the strength and the success of their existing relationship rather than engage in a process that diminishes regional trade flows and undermines integration and makes automotive supply chains less reliable and less profitable and inefficient. Mexico must reaffirm its commitment to work with the United States, not against the United States, to address current and future challenges that our truck industry faces. So then, what about Canada? The Embassy of Canada in Washington wrote this week, "It is inconceivable that U.S. trade with Canada could be a national security threat due to both nations sharing a tightly integrated defense industrial base and being national security partners. There is therefore no justification for the government of the United States to take action in this area for imports of medium and heavy-duty trucks from Canada. Canada is a leading market for American-made trucks. In 2024, Canada accounted for 67% of U.S. medium and heavy-duty truck exports, totaling nearly $7.2 billion in exports to Canada alone. For more than 20 years, the U.S. has enjoyed a significant trade surplus in medium and heavy-duty trucks with Canada. And now the poor Canadians are being punished by this idiot Donald Trump. In the year 2024, the United States bought less than $2.9 billion worth of medium and heavy-duty trucks from Canada, resulting in a $4.3 billion U.S. trade surplus. Now, medium and heavy-duty trucks assembled in Canada contain a significant amount of American-made components, such as engines from a Cummins engine plant in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and a Paccar engine plant in Columbus, Mississippi. Canada is a stable and reliable source of trucks and truck parts to the United States and contributes to a stable North American supply chain. Imports of Canadian trucks and truck parts do not impair or threaten to impair U.S. national security in any way. To the contrary, open trade with Canada strengthens U.S. national security by allowing the United States and its trucking industry to access trucks and truck manufacturers, to access also related parts from its most reliable trading partners. And we can safely say that all of this also applies to Mexico. Now, Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, in a panic reaction, made his second trip to the White House since May on Tuesday of this week. And Donald Trump spoke of a mutual love between Canada and the United States. However, then he added, that is tempered by a natural conflict over trade that we have with Canada. Well, Prime Minister Carney, meanwhile, left the White House 2 days ago in his motorcade early on Tuesday afternoon without taking any questions at all. He looked angry. From Trump praising Mr. Carney as a world-class leader to suggesting he might pursue separate trade deals with Canada and Mexico, there were 4 key moments from the Prime Minister's meeting with Donald Trump. And alarmingly, Trump expressed ambivalence about the future of the U.S.-Mexico commercial agreement, the USMCA. Mr. Trump suggested he might just abandon the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement entirely, or he said we will have to see what happens when the USMCA is up for review next year. And we might, said Trump, we might instead seek to strike separate trade deals with Canada and with Mexico. We can renegotiate, and that would be good. Or, what would be better, we can just do different deals. We are allowed to do different deals if we want, Trump said. I don't care. I want to make whatever the best deal is for my country. Well, the three parties, Mexico, the US, and Canada, have already launched domestic consultations on the North American Trade Pact. As tariffs continue to mount, Mr. Carney has repeatedly noted that the bulk of Canada's trade, about 85%, with the United States of America remains duty-free, thanks to the USMCA exemptions. The U.S. average tariff rate on Canadian goods right now sits at 5.6%, which makes it the lowest among all of U.S. trading partners. Still, the Trump administration maintains sector-specific tariffs, known as Section 232 tariffs, which are taking a tremendous toll on industries, not just in Canada, but in Mexico as well. Here we're talking about steel and aluminum and copper, and now we've got these sector-specific tariffs also starting on November 1st on medium and heavy-duty trucks. Now, Mr. Carney told Trump Canada was prepared to make an estimated $1 trillion worth of investments in the United States in the next 5 years if, and only if, it gets the deal that Canada expects to get. So here we have very clearly the offer of a bribe, a mordida, that is up to $1 trillion. And here we're talking in Spanish of un billón con B grande de dólares en 5 años si los canadienses obtienen un trato aceptable. Well, taking a page from the playbook of other U.S. trading partners, Canadian officials have been tallying prospective investment that business or government would make in the U.S. Trump said the two countries are working on formulas to get the details right, an apparent reference to the idea of a tariff rate quota on Canadian trucks. Well, Prime Minister Mark Carney says he is surprised the once solid Canada-United States trade relationship has now irrevocably become a mostly transactional one. It's not totally that way, but it's moved in that direction. And we are in the process of finding the right balance, Mark Carney said, of ongoing trade negotiations a day after meeting with Donald Trump this week. We also understand it's America first, not America alone, Carney said in a virtual address to a Toronto business executive audience. The Prime Minister of Canada said the trade war has created new caution and skepticism around deeper integration with the United States because that could lead to similar issues down the road. Carney brought up China as a potential partner for growth in certain sectors in Canada. He called competition against Beijing a bad choice. Sentiments around the Trump-Carney meeting soured after Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick advised the same audience in Toronto in that virtual appearance earlier in the day that Canada should make concessions in the auto sector if it wants to close a deal in the future. Trump's meeting with Mark Carney has sparked renewed urgency in closing trade deals with Canada soon. Carney's cabinet ministers and Trump's secretaries have been tasked to find paths, if at all possible, to make deals on steel, aluminum, energy, and now trucks. Concurrent with those talks is the trilateral American trade deal renewal process, now underway ahead of negotiations that are set to begin early next year. Finally, then, Trump's former chief of staff, Reince Priebus, said on Wednesday of this week that Carney's initial tough anti-Trump language was not a smart strategy. He said Trump is totally and completely accessible. This is what Reince Priebus told the business audience in Toronto. And he called his former boss, Donald Trump, a one-on-one guy. He added, he is personable, Priebus said, and I think Carney figured that out now. When asked what advice he, Priebus, would give Carney amid negotiations, Priebus suggested getting more in the president's face. In other words, face-to-face meetings are important. And he said, Priebus said, I would go play golf with the president. I would do whatever you could to strike up a personal relationship with the president. And I think, personally, that too would be really good advice for President Sheinbaum as well. Her 5 telephone conversations in the past 9 months are just not enough anymore. She needs to get face to face with Donald Trump in the near future.
So another battle has been opened this week, Dr. Werner Boyd, and more difficulties Claudia Sheinbaum is going to face. Which is not only tariffs, but even the possibility of Canada and US trying to become single allies. And this seems to be an endless confusion, an endless weekly problem that we are facing with the administration of Donald Trump. This is going to bring even further difficulties in trying to renegotiate the trade agreement that we have with Canada and with the US. And of course, also all the additional costs that will be transferred to most of the citizens eventually. But yeah, it's just amazing how every week there's a new title to talk about related to tariffs that I think is pushing many other countries, such as the United Kingdom, to look for new trade agreements, such as between the UK and India, and of course Mexico, regardless that they have been trying to get closer to Canada and seek a new trade agreement, at least worst case scenario, a bilateral trade agreement. Still, every week is difficult to predict what will happen with Donald Trump that can change the rules of the game nowadays that we are discussing.
Absolutely, and if Trump succeeds in sabotaging, in killing the USMCA trade agreement, then Mexico will have to change its negotiation strategy totally. Then we will have to focus on negotiating a separate trade agreement with the United States, which does not include Canada, and after that, conclude a new trade agreement with Canada that does not include the United States. We are potentially entering a totally new reality.
Yes, so let's see, because like you mentioned, Claudia Sheinbaum will likely have to change her negotiating strategy, and also we don't know what will happen by next week as well, as Donald Trump is so unpredictable, and there's always a new sector that will be impacted by his decisions. In the meantime, we would like to appreciate once again for taking this phone call, provide us a very deep analysis of what is happening on this matter between the US, Mexico, and Canada, and of course try to predict with your analysis what could happen and what are the potential solutions for the administration of Claudia Sheinbaum.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
It was such a pleasure for us and for our audience. We would like to wish you and your family a great weekend and speak to you next Friday.
All right, it'll be a pleasure.
Pues amigos, como escucharon, un tema muy interesante una vez más con Donald Trump. Todo se va complicando. Ahora los tractores, todos estos vehículos de carga pesada. También pues Canadá no empieza a descartar todos estos cambios de juego que busca un acuerdo bilateral, como nos menciona el doctor Werner Boyd. Y sin embargo México tendrá que estar a la expectativa porque cada semana cambian las reglas del juego y cada semana Claudia Sheinbaum tendrá que volver a reasesorar su estrategia diplomática, que en ocasiones funcionaría, pero en ocasiones parecería que se echaría atrás. Claramente es lo que quiere buscar Donald Trump, ir debilitándolos, creando confusión, abriendo distintos frentes para cambiar eventualmente la estrategia de todos, llamémosles sus rivales o países rivales. Y pues amigos, de esta forma queremos agradecer a todos. Antes de despedirnos, los invitamos como todos los días a que le den like, compartan, dejen sus comentarios y nos escuchamos a partir del próximo lunes con noticias frescas antes que los demás. Hasta la próxima.